All right, hi everybody. Today we're going to share with you an Indigenous community-led approach to cultural safety education that seeks to decolonize the healthcare system through making and dialogue. This is a 3-year collaboration between Emily Carr University and the College of New Caledonia. This is the clicker. Okay. We want to disclose that this project is funded by the Vancouver Foundation through a systems change grant. So one of the unique aspects of the work that we're going to talk about today is that it's an approach to cultural safety education for healthcare students and healthcare practitioners, but it emerges through the work and practice of an Indigenous and a design team from Emily Carr University in close collaboration with the College of New Caledonia. We're led by Marlene Erickson, who's the Executive Director of Aboriginal Programs at CNC, and Brenda Crabtree, who's the Director of Aboriginal Programs at Emily Carr and Special Advisor to the President on Indigenous Initiatives. We have a really big team that we couldn't all get into this room today, but we have some really critical members who all contribute to the work in really diverse and significant ways. We have an elder, we have Indigenous artists, we have designers, we have a non-Indigenous family physician, and an Indigenous nurse who's also part of this group. I'm Kaylee. I'm the director of the Health Design Lab at Emily Carr University. I'm a settler of Eastern European descent, working and living on the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh territory, along with the rest of our Emily Carr team.
Hi, I'm Nadia Bezai, and I'm the coordinator at the Health Design Lab, working at Emily Carr, and my ancestry is Middle Eastern and South Asian.
Anine, my name is Zoe Laycock. I'm an Anishinaabe Métis. I'm a recent graduate of Emily Carr and going into the MFA program, and I'm a research assistant on this project.
Our team started this work more than 3 years ago with an idea of how art and material practice could foster cultural safety, and the sort of purpose and intention behind this work has really only been further validated by the In Plain Sight report that was published last year. So as noted in that report, current education and training programs are inadequate to address Indigenous-specific racism in healthcare. Indigenous healthcare statistics continue to highlight marginalization, inequities, and disparity in healthcare for Indigenous people. So clearly something is lacking, and we need to extend the learning of healthcare practitioners to include the pillars of cultural competency. But more importantly, we have to recognize the limitations of classrooms and clinical practice in teaching those pillars, and we need to find methods to help move healthcare providers to a place where they can integrate these things into their practice. And so we need culturally relevant strategies and learning tools to improve cultural safety within healthcare.
Having participated in and observed other cultural safety education programs, our team saw an opportunity to develop an approach that was more relational, community-based, and culturally immersive. Currently, most cultural safety education programs are developed specifically for healthcare practitioners or students. So we decided to create a program that would bring healthcare students and Indigenous people together as co-participants for the purpose of shared learning in mutual benefit. Key to the workshop experience has been the inclusion of local artists, as Kaylee mentioned, knowledge holders, and cultural advisors. In this case, we partnered with the College of New Caledonia, so that was the Lheidli T'enneh region. Oh. Green one. Our workshop model includes a 2.5-day workshop for approximately 20 participants, where we strive for an equal contribution and distribution between Indigenous community members and healthcare providers. The workshop follows a loose, structured agenda that relies heavily on the makeup of who we bring into the room to facilitate rich and meaningful dialogue and the sharing of experiences. The workshop is less of a teacher-student model and more of a community coming together. As for the workshops themselves, the general rhythm for each of the 3 days is convening, a diverse group of people coming together in a shared space, a sharing circle, which is an opportunity for learning, unlearning, and active listening and sharing. Resting, a chance to digest what was happening through intentional breaks in the programming, shared over lunch, as also through the making as well, which is an embodied experience of reaching a level of connection through cultural practices and material practice through shared experience, and reflecting, which happened throughout the workshop, but also an opportunity to extend that learning beyond the workshop, as some of the making activities were intentionally meant to be not completed in that session and allowed for an opportunity to extend that, share it with community members and others after the workshop. So we started the workshop with a Brave Space Agreement. It was an entry point in understanding into Indigenous-led mechanisms. Sharing circles are inherently intended to be brave spaces, and other Indigenous protocols have built-in layers of respect. We've tried to enable students to connect with real community members to hear everyday stories and experiences. So far, we found that this has really helped to break down the prejudices and views of racism. It's not by clicking through an online course or sitting with someone reading through historical facts. It's about creating safer spaces and brave spaces to have those difficult conversations.
Our days began with listening to knowledge holders, elders, and respected Indigenous leaders from the community who have really deep understanding of Indigenous history, culture, making, and lived experience. This facilitated a direct connection to local Indigenous culture and community. Knowledge holders laid a foundation of learning that we could reflect on and build off of in our sharing circles and discussions throughout the weekend. Our knowledge holders introduce important historic contexts and how Indigenous people and communities are still impacted today. The workshops create space for participants to share and learn from one another. Specifically, sharing circles created structured spaces where participants felt safe and welcome to be open and vulnerable and brave enough to share their emotional response with the group. Learning came from hearing each other's lived experiences and perspectives. It's one thing to read about racism and abuse. It's another thing to listen to a fellow group member talk about how racism has impacted their life. These stories showed us how the impacts of residential schools are very much still a part of the current lived experiences of Indigenous people today. Through sharing personal stories and the shift between talking and making, the workshops create a space for reflections on allyship and advocacy, courage and authenticity, and learning through embodied experience. In other seminars, people listen and then go away. They don't build a community or deeper understanding through connections. For ours, the making facilitates the sense of community amongst those involved. Making offered participants both space to rest and reflect on the sharing circle. Balancing making, rest, reflection, structured and unstructured conversations creates necessary conditions for introspection, learning, unlearning, and healing. Making creates an environment that stimulates dialogue. While making, participants connect and learn from Indigenous artists and their peers through formal and informal conversations. Making offers tangible connections to land and traditional Indigenous practices and knowledge holders in their communities. One of the participants expressed that they felt really relaxed, quote, "When I was making, the anxiety from the tough conversations was being let out through the making. Starting the day with serious discussions in the sharing circles, and then during the making, I was thinking about what we were making, what ancestors used these things for, and how to connect to the materials and items we've made." Each day involved making taught by several local artists. We worked on many projects, each specifically chosen to match the pacing, mood, and conversations of each day. The projects were not meant to be completed in the workshop. They are meant to connect participants with making and each other and through conversation. The making is also a key element which benefits Indigenous participants. One participant said they gifted their drum to their dad. He was so happy and proud. "You made this?" For my dad to talk is hard, and he opened up when I gave him the drum, told me to talk to Grandma while she's still here. Making creates an opportunity for many participants to connect with their culture and to material practice resources that are hard to access, particularly in smaller communities. Drum making takes a tenacity that exhausts your body and yet brought out the best laughter and stories. There was relief and pride. When participants finished their drum that brought everyone together, reminding us that one of our integral Indigenous teachings, we are all one. A nursing student said, doing the drum making ourselves is a whole new aspect because you learn it's not just about cultural safety, but by participating in it, you're learning cultural safety in a different way. It's not just hearing about it, you're doing it.
So through feedback and interviews with participants, we've run the workshop 4 times now, we understand that the workshop impacts participant learning in supportive and relational ways. The workshop provides a culturally immersive experience that shifts away from a deficit-based perspective of Indigenous culture. Indigenous participants are not limited to sharing stories about trauma, but they're able to share a spectrum of themselves and their stories as present, as embedded, and engaged members of their nations and their communities. Participants expressed an understanding of not just the systemic impacts of racism within healthcare settings, but also where they sit within those systems and how they might be able to see themselves and they see their practice as being able to be part of that change. Now, we wanted to conclude, we are missing our leaders today, and we wanted to conclude by sharing a few words by Marlene Erickson, who's the project leader at the College of New Caledonia. So I think we're going to just attempt to play her audio because the video is not working, so we hope you can hear this.
In conclusion, we're very excited about the positive outcomes of this great teaching. It demonstrates how building relationships is foundational to changing attitudes and building networks of support. And these key teachings are not being taught and really can't be taught in most classrooms. Further, it draws on local knowledge holders, so there's no shortage of expertise, especially when you consider that most specialist care requires rural to urban travel. It is important for health professionals in these regional and urban centers to foster relationships and give the parents the courage to reach out and build those relationships and supports when they get home. Cultural competency, or as our elders call it, gentle hands, is a critical component of improving the health outcomes of Indigenous peoples, probably as important as the medical knowledge students learn. And we hope workshops like this one will instill those skills so the participants will carry them into their professional practice and beyond. Nina Shafia, thank all of you. You have honored us.
So we've piloted this workshop model 4 times over the last 3 years. We're holding a 6-week exhibit at the Two Rivers Gallery in Prince George this summer, as well as creating a publication to help disseminate this model. And we're now really interested to look at how can we bring this model and this approach to other communities, other healthcare contexts. So if people are interested, please feel free to reach out to us. But we'll conclude there. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing this with us. I love everything about this. I love the learning by doing aspect. I think that's wonderful. I was just curious, is the workshop co-facilitated by an Indigenous community member and a healthcare worker, or who facilitates the workshop?
Yeah, so I don't know, can we go back? Maybe not. There are about 10 of us facilitating the workshop and in that room. So it's really a big part of the workshop experience is who else is in the room helping to make that experience happen. And so in that room has been, Indigenous leaders, Indigenous artists, local elders. We have had, we recruited an Indigenous nursing student who participated in one of the first workshops. She now helps co-facilitate it. We have a non-Indigenous family physician who's there. So we're really mindful about who we're bringing into the room in addition to the participants and how those voices really contribute to that whole experience.
Yeah, I think this idea of like ratios and who's involved in the team was core to kind of even as thinking about how do we run this workshop. And I think people have approached us of, oh, how do you scale this? And does your team hop around and, replicate this elsewhere? And I think core to the model is really building community with the building local community connections, and so that you can't just pick up and go. It's about establishing that, and that takes time, and then thinking how can you then potentially work on a workshop together that, you know, builds capacity, includes the artist, creates a sense of collective locally.
Thank you for the wonderful work that you're doing, building the connections. Is there any intention for the participants in the workshop to continue those relationships in the community that can actually build the awareness for the negative impact of healthcare on Indigenous patients and shift that culture? You know, is there intention to continue those relationships, reach the decision makers to shift the landscape?
Yes, absolutely there is. Particularly where we ran where we've run all of these workshops up at the College of New Caledonia. We've been in meetings, and we are actually trying to we're hosting an exhibition up there where we're inviting deans, the board members, people kind of in charge who are involved in making those decisions to make this more of a, at least if not permanent, a more sustained workshop that affects the healthcare students, health and dental students up at that institution.
The context we've been running the workshop in right now is that the participants in the last few times that we've run it have largely been nursing and dental hygiene students from the College of New Caledonia, and Indigenous students also from the College of New Caledonia. So we're bringing people together who are all from the same community, who all run into each other in the halls, in town, and so it's about connecting those people together. And yeah, we're hoping in this summer, the entire executive leadership team at the College of New Caledonia has asked us to come back and run the workshop for their team and talk about decolonizing education.
So Megan, I've got one more question here. Is that all right, Megan? Yeah, all right.
Thanks. That was really wonderful. As a white settler myself, and working with elders in our community, one of the things we learned around doing dialogue circles and this kind of relational practice is preparing people to be ready to be in the room. So I'm just curious what you're doing with your students in order to, your non-Indigenous students, in order to be able to help them understand the history of Indigenous people before they come into circle with Indigenous people, because we have learned that maybe that is an important first step before so that you can create a culturally safe space. Just curious about what your thinking is around that.
It's an excellent question, and one that we've thought about a lot, especially as bringing students in who are kind of new to the context in which, dental hygiene, they're focused in that context and maybe not as aware as someone working in the field for 20 years about the interconnections of Indigenous people in their workplace. And so when we ran the workshop online, we were like, oh, how do we prepare people? We're so kind of not connected in our own community and can't have a chance to connect. And we ran a bit of an orientation beforehand to share kind of readings and things of an expectation that people would read a few things before they showed up. And then we thought about it again for the in-person one. We're like, oh, do we run another orientation? And we realized just sharing content for them to review beforehand, and knowing us, our team, having a knowingness and awareness that people are showing up from different points in that kind of learning journey, and just being welcoming to that idea and aware of that beforehand, and making sure that our team knows that, and people are kind of making mistakes in the moment, but just kind of looking forward to learning through that experience rather than shaming people for not knowing something, and kind of allowing for that emergence to happen during the session. So an interesting thing that happened in our most recent in-person workshop was we had the sharing circle, where often it's quite emotional and there's a lot that's shared and deep stories, and most of the Indigenous members had deep-rooted stories to share, and we were wondering, are the dental students, what are they going to share? And we gave them an opportunity to say something or pass if they didn't, so it didn't feel like a forced, I have to equate my story to something that was shared. And the non-Indigenous people on our team recognized that there's no way of equating that, and so to try to do that is almost disrespectful in some ways. So we allowed people to kind of come in as they were, and we were surprised actually how many of the students, they all ended up saying something and almost being more honest than they thought they were going to be even 2 minutes before. The amount of people that said, oh, I wasn't going to say anything, but now I just feel like empowered to share as everyone's being so vulnerable in their own ways. So I think there's an expectation to, I guess, go back to your question of what do you share beforehand, but there's also this power of just creating a sense of vulnerability and comfort in the moment that people, it comes to them in the moment how they want to show up. And that sense of vulnerability, I think, is what creates community.
I would just add to that, too, that the workshop is 2.5 days, and we start with the half day on the Friday evening. So that's a little bit of an easing into what the experience is going to be like. And there's Brenda Crabtree, who's our leader from Emily Carr. She starts the day by talking about sort of some of those hard-hitting facts and the state of Indigenous racism in healthcare right now. So it kind of starts with a little bit more of knowledge holders sharing. And the sharing circle on the first day is a little bit more just kind of introductory, and then that really primes people, and Saturday morning seems to just be more intense than even we expect, even though we expect it every time. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.